Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everyone, to the Aptitude 2020 webinar series. We are excited to host these interactive sessions again this year, featuring the latest in healthcare trends, supplier products, and other key industry topics. And just real quick before we get started on our actual content today, for those of you not familiar with us, Aptitude is an approach that many of the nation's larger sophisticated purchasing organizations are leveraging to accelerate their supply chain activity. It's a process that's being adopted by value analysis teams, contract managers, supply chain professionals, and clinical staff. And as a result, providers are more effectively managing their PPI strategy, accelerating value analysis structure, gaining line of sight into opportunities, and viewing market trends to better align with the right strategic partners. It's an all-encompassing approach from cross-references to responding to bids. It's all streamlined into one platform, resulting in a simplified, more efficient contracting process. And it also accelerates and delivers speed to contract. Standard T&C means less time in legal, and again, the single platform creates efficiencies that result in 60% shorter contract cycle. And the third benefit for suppliers is business intelligence. They have analytics to create meaningful dialogue and transparency into contract performance. It creates a single source of truth for you and your suppliers to align your goals and have informed conversations. So you can see why a supplier would choose to do business through Aptitude and how it enables them to offer the additional value that organizations like yours are seeking. Suppliers are passing value to providers because they are seeing value through Aptitude. So now let's get ready to turn it over to our content experts for today's webinar. Joining us today from Smith Nephew are John Madden, Corporate Accounts Manager, and David Jones, Director of National Accounts, to speak to us about their Trigen Intertan nail that is helping patients become mobile sooner and stay mobile longer. So John, let me turn this over to you.
Okay. And while we're doing that, just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you on behalf of myself and Smith Nephew for giving us this opportunity. Laura, we really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. We are happy to have you. Okay, I believe I've given you presenting skills, so it should be all up to you now. And everyone else on the phone, if you wouldn't mind muting your lines.
So I need to just click share my meeting window, correct?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Just want to check.
And yeah, you're coming through now.
Okay, so you can see the presentation at this point?
Not yet. It looked like it was about to come through. Click on share and then share content. There you go.
How about now?
Now we can see you. Perfect.
Perfect. Alrighty, well, thank you again, Laura. So to recap real quick, my name is John Madden. I'm a Corporate Accounts Manager within Trauma and Extremities at Smith Nephew. And one of the things I've been charged with over the past several years is to figure out what's going on behind the scenes with hip fracture, clinically and economically. And for that reason, I'm going to give you a full overview of the state of the union on hip fracture in this country, and also an overview on our Trigen Intertan. It has some patented technologies and some clinical data that I think you'll want to see. So the challenges in hip fracture treatment, these two pictures sort of explain what commonly happens, unfortunately. On the left, you see an elderly lady who's rather healthy and walking, can move around freely. And unfortunately, on the right is a lot of times what we see happen after a hip fracture. There is a significant amount of patients that just don't do well generally from a physical and mental standpoint prior to sustaining a hip fracture. Some of these statistics, the top three come from the website of the AAOS, which is the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. As you can see, as I mentioned, only 25% recovered a pre-fracture function. Almost a quarter of them die within a year, and half of them lose the ability to walk without some sort of aid. From an economic standpoint, roughly 350,000 hospital admissions per year. You'll see that number go up and down a little bit in the literature, but 350 is a pretty good number from hip fracture. The overall cost is roughly $20 billion. And then, of course, 40% of these patients unfortunately need some type of post-op nursing home care. And on average, if you were to look at nursing home cares and the cost, roughly $70,000 per year is what you would spend to have somebody inside a nursing home for an entire year. So what happens to the patients that do heal? Well, unfortunately, we see some serious declines compared to patients of the same age who have not sustained a hip fracture. So you can see up here, 56% decline in mobility. The activities of daily living really suffer. Self-reported health goes down, and then, of course, fine motor skills go down to roughly 30%. So with all that being said, what about reoperations? What about the patients who have a failed hip fracture and have to come back into a facility and have some type of operation? Well, there was a nice analysis in a review of 19 studies done by the sources you can see at the bottom. They measured it 1 year. It was 19 different studies. And they found the reoperation rate for internal fixation, which means any type of implants you would use except for a total hip or a partial total hip or a hemiarthroplasty. They found that failure rate to be 6.6%, which is rather high. And the average cost of that, the entire situation of being readmitted and reoperated on, roughly $30,000. Obviously, that could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower at the different institutions throughout the country, but the average cost is $30,000 as reported in the literature. So what have we heard from our customers and our partners throughout the industry? What can we do? Well, what we can do to help is to increase quality while streamlining costs. So you want to get better outcomes at less cost. We all understand that, and we want to be able to provide that, as an implant provider. Alternatives to skilled nursing facilities. Roughly 2/3 of these patients end up in skilled nursing facilities, as reported in the literature. And the skilled nursing facilities are quite expensive, up to around $20,000 on average at day 90, if you were to look at the entire episode of care from a bundled care environment statistic. Decreasing readmissions, of course. Length of stay, if that can go down, that would be fantastic. We all know a day's stay in a hospital is extremely expensive. Developing better hip fracture protocols, and then, of course, using implants leading to less rehab, which is where we would come in as an implant manufacturer. So what I'm about to show you is the evidence that we found in the literature, and it's based on 34 peer-reviewed journal publications. I certainly don't expect you to read all these in the reference section, but just wanted you to know that this is a very comprehensive review of studies from 34 peer-reviewed journals throughout the world. So these are not just bullet points that we cherry-picked from certain papers out there. These are 34 peer-reviewed journals throughout the world. So with the Trigen Interten, the first major bullet point that we have found is a 6.5% reduction in implant-related failures. And all these stats I'm going to show you are statistically significant. You'll look at the p-value there. So remember, we said the reoperation rate of 6.6% and the cost of $30,000. Per 100 patients, you're looking at anywhere from 180,000 to 220,000, depending on how you round on that 6.6%. So that can be extremely costly. So, we find a 6.9% reduction in implant-related failures. And remember, those are what lead to the reoperation rates. Oftentimes, these patients have to go back, get the implants removed, and get a total hip procedure. Next major bullet point is a nearly 3-week faster time to fracture union. So fracture union, that term specifically means the bone healing. And in this particular situation, for all these studies, the comparator devices are our two main competitors, Stryker and Synthes. So a 3-week faster time to fracture union, 14 weeks on average compared to 16.5 to 17 weeks there. With these comparator devices. So that's a pretty extreme measure there, 3 weeks. Also, in the study below, we found a direct 20% reduction in the length of stay with the Trigen Interten compared to the Stryker Gamma 3 nail in that study. It was a blinded study, and they followed these patients for 5 years, actually. So a very thorough study. So important to note that a 20% reduction in length of stay, not only better clinically, but also better, of course, economically. So in these studies, and unfortunately with a lot of these patients, they see a tremendous amount of pain in their hip. And I mean, it's very simple. The hip is broken, so it hurts. But more importantly on this, the traditional way of healing a hip fracture is to allow the implant and the bones to slide together in order to promote healing. And the problem with that is it hurts. And these patients often won't get out of bed or they won't get up as often. With the Trigen Intertan patented technology that we have developed, it's a little bit different. We developed an integrated screw construct, and I'm not going to get into too many biomechanical details on it, but it actually allows for the surgeon to compress and hold the fracture in place with the implant so that the patient can get up and move quicker, get out of bed faster, and get discharged earlier. So a huge point here, a 54% reduction in chronic hip and thigh pain versus those competitive devices. And if you go back to the first slide that I sent over, according to the AAOS, 24% is on average what you would see of these patients getting back to pre-fracture status. And if you look here, the lowest that we found in the literature was 58%, which is actually one of the tougher scores. It was under the Harris hip score, which is generally done for total hip patients who have their whole hip replaced. Right? So they're not relying on bone healing necessarily from a fracture. They have had their hip replaced. So it's a pretty stringent test. And so the lowest score that we found was well over double what's reported by the AAOS website. So again, very, very significant for us. So a couple of more studies that have been reported in the literature. They're not part of that specific brochure 34. These are two extra. So we found in this particular study of the Trigen Intertan nail versus the competition that uses a single screw, which is the majority of the competition minus some of the Synthes implants. We found an 81% reduction in implant-related failures versus those, and a 65% reduction in revision surgeries. Over on the right, you'll see a 45% reduction in hip and thigh pain, and then the HHS improvement on the right, you'll see that these patients saw that had the Trigen Intertan implanted for their hip fractures. And on the more economic side, this particular study again looked at Synthes nails compared to the Intertan throughout the entire episode of care, which at this point is considered post-discharge 90 days. They found a $2,700 per patient reduced cost in the entire episode of care when patients had the Trigen Intertan implanted versus the two competitors. So just a quick example here, just to put some numbers there. Remember the 69% reduction in implant-related failures. If you go back and look at the reoperations of 6.6%, which actually if you multiply that times 104, it's real close to 7. 2.04 is what it would be for Intertan. So the cost of $60,000 versus $210,000. Now I get it with reimbursements and the way things are go, those numbers would shift around a little bit. But just in simple math, you could see a cost difference of $150,000 right here. So just thought I'd give you a quick example and put some numbers with some time frames. So that is all I have as far as PowerPoint goes. I don't want to, give you a death by PowerPoint type presentation. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and comments. So Laura, if you want, I can turn it back over to you for questions and comments.
That was great. Thank you, John. And yeah, now we'd like to open it up to anybody on the line. If you have any questions for them, we'd be happy to take them now.
Remember to unmute if you are speaking at this point.
Yes, please. If you were speaking, we cannot
Easy to do.
If not, we do have one that's come in here on the WebEx. I can read it real quick here. It's, are you seeing hospital systems and buying groups starting to categorize within the ortho trauma portfolio?
That's a great question. We are. From some of the bigger institutions and even some of the smaller institutions, the traditional trauma category is sort of expanded when you're looking at the different parts of the anatomy. And one we feel that we should take a second look at, as an industry, obviously, is hip fracture for several different reasons. Number one, the rising aging population. The overwhelming majority of these patients are above the age of 65. And we know with the baby boomer generation moving its way up, the numbers are going to increase significantly. Also, the way that the government is looking at reimbursements and the quality of care. You can already see it from CMS and things like programs like CJR and BPCI Advanced. So we would highly recommend, entertaining the idea of looking at the category of hip fracture. And we have seen other categories come out. There's more emphasis on the foot. There's more emphasis on the hand and wrist, which I think is definitely necessary as well. But I would highly encourage to take a second look at hip fracture, the way things have been going.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm sure that thoroughly answers their question. And for those of you on the phone, we will send a follow-up here, and we can send you John's contact information. So for anyone of you that would like to follow up with him directly, you can do that as well. But again, anyone that has any specific questions you'd like to ask? Okay. Well, we will wrap things up then. We will place this recording out on our website here within the next day or two. So if anyone of your colleagues missed it and they'd like to reference it, you can definitely log back in and listen to it. And just again, want to thank Smith Nephew for partnering with us. We really enjoy working with you guys and appreciate you taking the time to participate in our webinar today.
Excellent. Laura, thank you. And yeah, no problem. Please share the information. If there are any follow-ups or somebody has a question, I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Will do. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye-bye.